What happens when Hollywood's most respected legend walks into what should be a simple interview and finds himself face to face with a host who refuses to show even basic respect? It only took one disrespectful comment about his family for Harrison Ford to do something nobody saw coming. The studio lights were bright that evening. Harrison Ford walked onto the set looking exactly like you'd expect. Calm, professional, ready for what he thought would be a standard interview. He'd done thousands of these over his decades-long career. He knew the drill. Sit down, answer some questions, maybe tell a funny story or two, shake hands, and leave. Simple. Andy Cohen was sitting in his chair with that signature smirk on his face, the kind of smile that made you wonder what he was thinking. The audience was buzzing with excitement. After all, it's not every day you get to see Indiana Jones himself sitting just a few feet away. "Harrison Ford, everyone," Andy said as the applause died down. Harrison gave a polite wave and settled into his seat. He looked comfortable enough, but if you watched closely, you could see he was already a little guarded. Something in his eyes suggested he knew this might not go smoothly. "So Harrison, let's jump right in," Andy started, leaning forward in that way he does when he thinks he's about to ask something clever. "You've been in Hollywood for what, 100 years now?" Harrison's expression didn't change. "Not quite 100, but it's been a while, yes." The audience laughed. Andy laughed too, but it felt forced, like he was laughing at Harrison rather than with him. Right, Andy continued. "So you've seen a lot of changes in the industry. All these new actors coming in, thinking they own the place. Must be weird for you watching these kids try to do what you did back in your prime." There it was, the first jab. Harrison shifted slightly in his seat. "I don't think of it that way," he said carefully. "Every generation brings something new. I respect what they're doing." "Oh, come on," Andy said, waving his hand dismissively. "You can't tell me you don't think the old days were better. I mean, nowadays everyone's so sensitive. You can't say anything without someone getting offended. Back when you were making the Indiana Jones movies, you guys could just do whatever you wanted, right?" Harrison's jaw tightened, just a bit. "We always tried to be respectful, even back then." "Respectful," Andy repeated, like the word tasted funny in his mouth. "Sure, but you weren't worried about every little thing like people are now. That's what I'm saying. Things were simpler." "I'm not sure I agree with your characterization," Harrison said. His voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now. A warning that Andy either didn't hear or didn't care about. Andy leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself. Okay. Let's talk about something else then. Star Wars. You played Han Solo, one of the biggest characters in movie history. But let's be honest, that was decades ago. Do you ever worry that's all anyone remembers you for? Like everything else you've done just doesn't matter, because you'll always be the guy from Star Wars? The audience got quiet. Even they could feel the tension building. Harrison looked at Andy for a long moment before answering. "I'm proud of Star Wars," he said slowly. "I'm proud of all the work I've done. I don't spend time worrying about what other people think of my career." "Right, but it must bother you a little bit," Andy pressed. "I mean, you've done so many other movies. Blade Runner, The Fugitive, all these serious dramatic roles. But at the end of the day, people still just want to talk about Han Solo and Indiana Jones. That's gotta sting." "It doesn't sting," Harrison said firmly. "Those characters mean something to people. I'm grateful for that." Andy made a face like he didn't believe him. "If you say so. But come on, Harrison. Between you and me, wouldn't you rather be known for your serious work? The Oscar-nominated stuff? Instead of, the popcorn movies?" Harrison's expression hardened. "I don't categorize my work that way. Every project I've been part of was important to me. I don't think any of it is less valuable than anything else." "Wow. Okay," Andy said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Touchy subject. Got it. Let's move on. But he didn't really move on. Not in the way you'd expect someone to move on when they realize they've hit a nerve. Instead, Andy seemed energized by Harrison's discomfort, like he'd found something to poke at. So let's talk about your personal life, Andy said, and Harrison's whole body language changed. He sat up straighter. His eyes narrowed slightly. I prefer to keep my personal life private, Harrison said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a boundary. Andy laughed. Oh, come on, Harrison. You're on a talk show. That's what we do here. We talk. Your wife, Callista, she's great. I love her. But the age difference between you two? That's got to be at least 20 years, right? How does that work exactly? The audience let out a collective gasp. You could feel the whole room shift. Harrison didn't answer right away. He just stared at Andy with an expression that would have made a smarter person apologize immediately. That's not an appropriate question, Harrison said quietly. But quiet didn't mean weak. His voice carried weight. Andy shrugged. Why not? Everyone's curious about it. I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. Does she ever make you feel old? Like, do you struggle to keep up with her? Andy, Harrison said, and his tone was a warning. Clear and unmistakable. But Andy kept going. I'm just saying, you're what, 80-something years old? She's still relatively young. That's got to create some challenges in the relationship. Different energy levels, different interests. Stop, Harrison said. Just one word. But it landed like a hammer. Andy blinked, seeming genuinely surprised that Harrison was pushing back. What? I'm not trying to be rude. I'm just making conversation. You're being disrespectful, Harrison said, and I'm asking you to stop. Disrespectful? Andy repeated, and he actually had the nerve to look offended. How am I being disrespectful? I'm asking normal questions. This is what I do on this show. If you didn't want to talk about your life, maybe you shouldn't have come on a talk show. Harrison took a deep breath. You could see him trying to maintain his composure. There's a difference between asking about someone's life and making inappropriate comments about their marriage. Andy rolled his eyes. Actually rolled his eyes at Harrison Ford. Oh, please. You're being way too sensitive. This is entertainment. Lighten up. I'm not being sensitive, Harrison said. I'm being clear about my boundaries, and you're choosing to ignore them. The audience was completely silent. Now. Everyone could feel that something was about to happen. Something big. Andy leaned forward again, and when he spoke, his voice had an edge to it. You know what your problem is, Harrison. You're stuck in the past. You can't handle the way interviews work now. Everything's changed, but you're still acting like it's 1980. This is how we do things today. We're honest. We're direct. We don't dance around topics just because they might make someone uncomfortable. Harrison stood up. Just stood right up in the middle of the interview. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Where are you going? Andy asked, and for the first time, he looked a little uncertain. Like maybe he'd finally realized he'd gone too far. I'm leaving, Harrison said simply. He reached up and unclipped his microphone. You can't just leave, Andy said, and he actually laughed nervously. We're in the middle of the interview. The interview is over, Harrison said. He set the microphone down on his chair. Andy's face went red. Are you serious right now? You're really going to walk out because I asked you a few questions you didn't like? Harrison turned to face him fully. You didn't ask me questions. You insulted my career. You insulted my choices. And you made inappropriate comments about my wife. I don't have to sit here and listen to that from anyone. I was just doing my job, Andy said, and now he sounded defensive. This is entertainment. People want to see real conversations, not boring, sanitized interviews where everyone just promotes their latest project. Real conversations involve respect, Harrison said, something you clearly don't understand. Andy stood up too now. Oh, so now you're going to lecture me about how to do my job? I've been doing this for years. I know what audiences want. What you know, Harrison said calmly, is how to be rude and call it honesty. There's a difference. I'm not rude, Andy insisted, his voice getting louder. You're just too sensitive to handle a real interview. This is exactly what I was talking about. Your generation can't handle it when someone doesn't kiss up to you. Harrison shook his head slowly. I've done hundreds of interviews with people who know how to ask tough questions without being disrespectful. You're not one of them. Get over yourself, Andy snapped. You think you're so special because you were in some movies? You're not. You're just another actor. And frankly, you're past your prime anyway. The audience let out shocked sounds. Some people started booing. Not booing Harrison, but booing Andy. Harrison didn't react to the insult. He just looked at Andy with something like pity. I feel sorry for you, he said quietly. I really do. I don't need your pity, Andy shot back. What I need is for you to sit down and finish this interview like a professional. Like a professional? Harrison repeated. You want to talk to me about being professional? You've spent the last 15 minutes trying to provoke me, making personal attacks, and being deliberately offensive. And now you want to lecture me about professionalism? Andy crossed his arms. I'm the host. This is my show. You don't get to tell me how to run it. You're right, Harrison said. It is your show, which is why I'm leaving. You can run it however you want, but you'll do it without me. Fine, Andy said, throwing his hands up. Go ahead. Walk out. Run away, because you can't handle a little back and forth. See if I care. Harrison started walking toward the exit. The camera followed him. The audience was murmuring. Some people were clapping. Andy called after him. You know what, Harrison? This just proves my point. You're washed up. You can't handle the modern world. Maybe you should just retire and stop embarrassing yourself. Harrison paused at the edge of the stage. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around and say something else. But he didn't. He just kept walking, straight off the stage and out of the studio. The cameras turned back to Andy, who was standing there looking angry and embarrassed. He tried to laugh it off. Well, that was dramatic. I guess some people just can't handle honest questions. But the audience wasn't buying it. The boos got louder. Someone yelled something about respect. Andy's face got even redder. Come on, he said, trying to regain control. We were just having a conversation. He didn't need to make such a big deal out of it. More boos. Andy looked around the studio, clearly not expecting this reaction. Seriously, he said, you're all going to take his side? I was just doing my job. This is what makes good television. A woman in the front row stood up. That wasn't good television, she said loudly. That was you being a jerk. Other audience members voiced their agreement. Andy held up his hands. Okay, let's just calm down. We'll take a commercial break. But the damage was done. The energy in the room had completely shifted. What started as an exciting opportunity to see a Hollywood legend had turned into something ugly, and everyone knew who was responsible. Look, Andy said, his voice taking on a whiny quality. I don't understand why everyone's so upset. I ask tough questions. That's what I do. If people can't handle it, they shouldn't come on the show. More people in the audience were standing now. Some were heading for the exits. Andy looked around frantically at his producers off camera. Where are you all going? He asked. The show's not over. We have more segments. But people kept leaving. They'd seen enough. They came to see Harrison Ford, and instead they got to watch a host tear down one of the most respected actors in the business for no good reason. Andy's voice got louder, more desperate. This is ridiculous. You're all overreacting. He's just an actor. He's not special. A man near the back shouted, He's a legend. Show some respect. Respect? Andy practically yelled. Why does everyone keep talking about respect? I respect him. I just asked him some questions. You insulted his wife, someone else called out. That's not asking questions. Andy's mouth opened and closed. I didn't insult anyone. I was just curious about the age difference. That's a legitimate topic. No, it's not, multiple people said at once. The producers were signaling frantically now. Andy looked at them and then back at the remaining audience members. "Fine," he said. "Fine. If you all want to leave, leave. I don't need you. I don't need him. I can do this show by myself." But he couldn't. Not really. Because a talk show without guests and without an audience is just one person talking to themselves. And everyone in that studio knew it. Andy sat back down in his chair, heavily. He looked defeated, angry, confused about how things had gone so wrong so fast. "Let's just go to commercial," he muttered to the cameras. Backstage, Harrison Ford was already in his car. His publicist was on the phone, already doing damage control, but Harrison didn't look worried. He looked calm, resolute, like a man who'd made the right decision and knew it. He'd walked into that studio expecting a normal interview. He'd left it having made a statement about boundaries, about respect, about not tolerating behavior that crosses the line no matter who you are, or what show you're on. Back in the studio, Andy sat alone on his set. The audience was mostly gone. The producers were having emergency meetings, and Andy was left to wonder how an interview with one of Hollywood's biggest stars had turned into a complete disaster. He kept trying to convince himself that he'd done nothing wrong, that Harrison was being difficult, that people were too sensitive these days. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, he knew the truth. He'd pushed too hard. He'd crossed lines that shouldn't have been crossed. He'd mistaken cruelty for honesty and arrogance for confidence. And when given multiple opportunities to pull back and show some basic human decency, he'd doubled down instead. The cameras were still rolling, but there was nothing left to film. Just an empty set, an absent audience, and a host who'd learned the hard way that being entitled and disrespectful has consequences. Andy tried one more time to address the cameras. "Look, I want to be clear about something. I run a certain kind of show here. We don't do softball interviews. We don't just let celebrities come on and plug their projects without pushing back. That's not interesting television. People want authenticity. They want real moments." But there was no one there to hear his justification. The studio was empty. The moment was over. And everyone who'd witnessed it knew exactly what kind of real moment it had been. Not the kind Andy was trying to claim, but the kind where a decent person stands up and walks away from someone who refuses to treat them with basic respect. Harrison Ford had spent decades building a reputation as a professional, a craftsman, someone who took his work seriously and treated people well. In all that time, through all those interviews and public appearances, he'd maintained his dignity and his boundaries. He wasn't going to let one entitled host change that. Andy finally stopped talking. He looked around the empty studio one more time, and for just a second, something flickered across his face. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe it was regret. But it disappeared as quickly as it came, replaced by defensive anger. The producers called for a final cut. The lights dimmed, and the interview that was supposed to be a highlight of the season became something else entirely. A reminder that respect matters, that boundaries matter, that treating people with basic human decency isn't optional, no matter how famous you are or what kind of show you host. Harrison Ford had walked onto that set. As a guest, he'd walked off as someone who'd drawn a line and stood by it. And in doing so, he'd given everyone watching a masterclass in maintaining your dignity, even when someone is actively trying to take it from you. The whole thing had fallen apart, not because Harrison was difficult or oversensitive, but because Andy had mistaken rudeness for boldness and boundary crossing for good television. He'd thought his position as host gave him the right to say anything, ask anything, push any button he wanted to push. Harrison had shown him otherwise, not by yelling, not by making a scene, but by simply refusing to participate, by standing up and walking away, by demonstrating that no amount of fame or success or legendary status means you have to sit there and take disrespect from anyone. In the green room, other scheduled guests were whispering. Word had spread fast about what happened. Some were reconsidering their own appearances. After all, if Andy could treat Harrison Ford that way, what chance did anyone else have? Andy's team was scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But some things can't be salvaged. Some moments are too clear, too definitive. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone had heard the comments. Everyone had watched Harrison give Andy multiple chances to change course before finally deciding enough was enough. The studio audience who'd left were already posting about it. The footage would be everywhere within hours. And the narrative was already set. Not the one Andy wanted, where he was the brave host asking tough questions, but the real one, where he was the entitled interviewer who couldn't understand the difference between probing and insulting. Harrison Ford didn't need to defend himself. His actions had said everything that needed to be said. He'd shown up. He'd been polite. He'd tried to steer the conversation back to respectful territory multiple times. And when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, he'd made a choice. That's what it came down to, really. A choice. Harrison chose his dignity over publicity. He chose respect over playing along. He chose to draw a line rather than pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Andy had made choices too. He'd chosen to push when he should have pulled back. He'd chosen to insult when he could have inquired. He'd chosen to make it about getting a reaction rather than having a genuine conversation. And when his guest set a boundary, he'd chosen to mock it instead of honoring it. Those choices led to this moment: an empty studio, a ruined interview, and a lesson that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to engage with someone who isn't treating you right. The cameras were off now. The crew was packing up. Andy sat in his chair, phone in hand, probably already seeing the reaction online. The bravado from earlier was gone. In its place was something that looked a lot like the dawning realization that he'd miscalculated badly. But realizations don't undo what's been done. They don't take back words that were said or repair damage that was caused. They just sit there, uncomfortable and unavoidable, forcing you to confront the consequences of your actions. Harrison Ford was probably home by now, or maybe getting dinner somewhere quiet. Either way, he wasn't thinking about Andy Cohen or the failed interview. He'd moved on, because when you know your worth and you stand by your principles, you don't need to dwell on people who refuse to respect them. Andy, on the other hand, would be thinking about this for a long time, about the interview that got away, about the legendary guest he drove off his own show, about the moment he confused being provocative with being profound, and learned the hard way that audiences can tell the difference. The whole thing lasted maybe 20 minutes. But in those 20 minutes, everything that could go wrong in an interview did go wrong. Not because of technical difficulties or awkward silences, but because one person thought the rules didn't apply to him, and another person proved they absolutely did. Harrison Ford didn't plan to make a statement that day. He just planned to do an interview. But sometimes statements make themselves. Sometimes the most powerful message you can send is the one you deliver by walking away from a situation that doesn't serve you. And that's exactly what he did. Calmly, clearly, with the kind of quiet strength that comes from decades of knowing who you are and what you stand for. He walked onto that stage as a guest and walked off as something more. A reminder that respect is not negotiable and dignity is not up for debate. The studio was dark now. The audience was gone. The guest was gone. And Andy was left with exactly what he'd earned through his behavior. Nothing but an empty set and a whole lot of questions about what went wrong. Questions everyone else already knew the answers to.